Money has been moving toward you for years. You have been the one stepping out of its path. It lives in the half second before you open the banking app. Your chest already knows the number. Your jaw already knows the number. The hand holding the phone already knows, and the eyes are only there for confirmation. The harder you reach for it, the more the field reads your reaching as absence. The oldest understanding of wealth was never about acquiring. It was about no longer interrupting what was already arriving. You were not failing. You were broadcasting the precise frequency of someone afraid it would not come. And the field, which has no language and no pity and no preference, was answering you with the precision of a mirror. Something in you always knew this. That knowing is what brought you here tonight, into this exact sentence, at this exact hour, when the rest of the world is asleep and the only thing left awake is the part of you that has been waiting to be told the truth without softening. The real question was never how to attract money. It is why a part of you has been returning it, unopened, the moment it arrived. Stay with that for a moment. Not the idea of it, the body of it. Because the part that just contracted when you read the word returning, the part that wanted to defend itself and say no, that is not me. I have wanted this. I have worked for this. I have begged for this. That part is exactly the layer we are going to speak to first. Not to argue with it, to listen to it long enough that it finally finishes its sentence, which it has been trying to finish, in the dark, for a very long time. There is a word for what we are going to do here. The word is recognition. Not learning, not teaching, not technique. Recognition is what happens when something you already carried inside you, without language, finally meets the language that was made for it. And the body knows the difference. The body always knows the difference. The mind can be fooled by a clever sentence, but the chest cannot. The chest either opens or it does not. And if it has not opened yet tonight, that is not a sign that this is not for you. It is a sign that the part of you that decides whether to open is still measuring, still checking, still asking, quietly, behind everything else, is this one going to be different, or is this another night of words that go nowhere? I will not promise you it is different. I will only ask you to notice, by the end of the first concept, whether anything in your chest has loosened without permission. If it has, you will know. If it has not, you can close this and lose nothing. That is the only honest contract I can offer you. So let us begin where it actually begins, which is not with the money, and not with the wanting, and not with the law, but with a single layer of you that almost no one ever names, because it is so close to your skin that you have mistaken it for yourself. There is a part of you that opens for what is arriving, and a part of you that does not. And almost everything in the spiritual conversation around abundance has been spent on the asking, and almost nothing has been spent on the opening. This is the first asymmetry we are going to correct. Imagine, for a moment, a cup left out in the rain. The cup is the right shape. The cup is in the right place. The cup is in every visible sense where it should be to receive what is falling. But the cup is tilted. Not enough that anyone looking from a distance would notice. Just enough that for every drop that lands inside it, 3 more roll down the outside and disappear into the ground. From above, the sky is generous. From the side, the cup is generous. From the angle no one can see from outside, the cup is, without knowing it, refusing. This is the receiving layer, not the wanting, not the asking, not the visualizing or the scripting or the affirming. The angle of the cup, the opening that decides, before anything else decides, how much of what is already falling actually lands inside you. And here is what almost no one has told you about money. The world is not stingy with it. The field is not withholding it. The numbers in your bank account are not low because the universe has miscounted. The numbers are low because at some point In a way you did not choose, the angle of your cup was set. By a parent who flinched when bills arrived. By a moment in childhood when you watched someone you loved be made smaller by a number. By a religious whisper that said wanting too much was a kind of disease. By a culture that taught you to call modesty what was actually fear. By 1,000 tiny adjustments to the angle of the cup, none of them large enough to remember, all of them adding up to a tilt you now mistake for your nature. You do not have a money problem. You have a receiving problem that expresses itself most visibly in the territory of money, because money is the most measurable form of what arrives. Let us name the mechanism precisely so we can speak to it later without confusion. The receiving layer is the part of your nervous system that decides, often in less than a second, what is allowed to land. It does not consult your goals. It does not check your vision board. It does not ask your conscious mind for permission. It runs on patterns laid down so early they feel like physics. And when money arrives, in any form, large or small, expected or surprising, the receiving layer is the first thing that meets it. Before the gratitude, before the planning, before the spending. There is a half second, sometimes less, in which the receiving layer either opens or contracts. And whatever it does in that half second writes the whole rest of the story. If it opens, the money settles. It finds a place inside your inner economy. It becomes something that can stay, something that can grow, something that can multiply not because of strategy, but because the field reads your nervous system as a container that can hold more and begins to send more. If it contracts, the money begins immediately to leave. Not always quickly. Sometimes it takes weeks. Sometimes it takes the form of an unexpected bill, or a sudden generosity towards someone else, or a purchase you did not need, or a slow erosion you cannot quite explain. The mind tells stories about why. The mind always tells stories. But underneath the stories there is one fact, and the fact is that the cup was tilted, and the water found the tilt, and the water did what water does, which is to follow the angle. This is why so much of what you have tried has almost worked. The methods are not wrong. The affirmations are not lies. The visualizations are not fantasies. They are real instruments designed to shift real frequencies, and they do shift real frequencies. But they shift the asking layer, and almost none of them, by themselves, reach the receiving layer. So you generate a stronger and stronger signal of wanting, and the receiving layer, untouched, continues to contract at the moment of arrival, and the result is the experience you have lived for years. Things almost happen. Opportunities almost land. Money almost stays. Almost, almost, almost. The ache of almost is not random. It is the exact signature of an asking layer that has been trained and a receiving layer that has not. And now, if this is real, something uncomfortable becomes true. I am going to name it directly, because softening it would insult you. If the receiving layer is the gate, then every time money arrived in your life and left quickly, it did not leave because the universe was cruel. It left because something inside you, without your knowing, opened the door on the other side and let it out. Not as punishment, not as flaw, as pattern. The cup tilted, and the water rolled down the outside, and you watched it go and called it bad luck, or bad timing, or someone else's fault, or proof that abundance was not for you. None of those stories were lies, exactly. They were the surface of something deeper. Underneath every one of them was the same quiet movement. The hand of the receiving layer, opening on the wrong side, at the wrong moment, the way it had been trained to open since long before you could name what was happening. This is not your fault. It is important that you hear that next sentence with the body, not the mind. It is not your fault. The angle of the cup was set when you were too small to choose. The patterns of receiving were laid down in rooms you did not design, by people who were themselves carrying their own tilted cups in a long line of tilted cups going back further than memory. You did not choose this, but you are the first one in the line who is awake enough to notice it. And what is noticed can be moved. And underneath the receiving layer, there is something older still. Because the receiving layer explains why money does not stay. It does not yet explain why, for some people, money does not seem to arrive in the first place. It does not explain why two people can do the same work, take the same risk, follow the same method, and end up with such radically different results that no amount of strategy can account for the gap. There is another layer beneath this one, and it is the layer that almost no spiritual teacher names directly, because naming it asks the listener to feel something most teachers are not willing to ask their listeners to feel. We will get there. But first, sit with this. The cup is tilted. You did not tilt it. And the work of the next hour is not to force it straight, which cannot be done by force, but to feel precisely where the tilt lives, so that the body itself can begin to remember a different angle. Because the body is the only thing that can change the angle. The mind can decide. The mind can affirm. The mind can repeat. But it is the body that holds the cup, and the body changes its grip only when it feels safe enough to do so. Notice, right now, what the front of your chest is doing. Not what you think it should be doing. What it is actually doing. If there is a small tightness there, that is the receiving layer, listening. If there is a softening, that is the receiving layer, beginning to open. Neither one is wrong. Both are information. Both are the body answering a question it has been asked too many times, in too many shallow ways, finally being asked at the right depth. The receiving layer has been waiting a long time for someone to speak to it directly. Most of your life, it has been spoken about, or worked around, or treated as an obstacle. Tonight is the first time, possibly, that anything has spoken to it as the intelligence it actually is. Because it is intelligent. It is not stupid. It is not broken. It is doing exactly what it was built to do, which is to protect you from receiving more than the inner economy can hold without collapse. And it has been so good at its job that it has protected you from things you actively wanted. That is not malfunction. That is fidelity. The receiving layer has been more loyal to your survival than your conscious mind has been to your dreams. And that loyalty deserves respect before it deserves change. So before we go to the next layer, let us thank the receiving layer for the work it has done. Not in a performative way, in a real way. It kept you safe when the inner economy could not hold more. It returned money you were not yet ready to keep. It softened arrivals that would have overwhelmed the nervous system you had at the time. It was not the enemy of your abundance. It was the gatekeeper of your survival. And only now, with everything you have built and everything you have become, is it possible to ask it, gently, to open a little wider. Not because it was wrong before, because you are different now. And the gate that was the right size for who you were is no longer the right size for who you are becoming. This is the first concept. The receiving layer is older than the asking, and almost everything you have done in the name of abundance has been spoken to the wrong layer. Now we go deeper, because if the receiving layer explains why money does not stay, there is still the question that haunts every honest seeker of this work. Why does money seem to come easily to people who do not even seem to want it, while you, who have wanted it with everything you have, watch it pass you by year after year? That question is not a small question. It is the question. It is the one you have been asking, quietly, at 3 a.m, when no one is watching, in language much rawer than anything you have ever said out loud, and it cannot be answered at the level of the receiving layer alone. It requires us to descend one more floor. There is a baseline inside you. Not a thought, not a belief, a baseline. The nervous system has decided, long before you were old enough to argue, what level of resources, of attention, of pleasure, of ease is safe for you to hold. That level is not negotiated by your conscious goals. It is set by the room you grew up in, by the tone your mother used when she paid the bills, by whether your father came home tired or angry or absent, by what happened in your body the first time you wanted something expensive and felt the air change around you, by 1,000 inputs you did not select, woven together into a single, silent floor. We will call this the resonance floor. It is the level your inner economy returns to, no matter how high you climb. You can earn above it. You can win above it. You can manifest above it for a season. But the resonance floor does not move because you earned more. The resonance floor moves only when the nervous system, in its own time, in its own way, agrees that more is safe to hold. And until it agrees, every time you climb above the floor, something will happen, gently or violently, to return you to it. This is why people who win the lottery often lose it. This is why your friend who hit a great year often had a strange, expensive disaster the next. This is why you, after every period of unexpected income, found a way to be back where you started within months, often without remembering how. None of it was random. The floor was doing its work. The floor always does its work. It is not malicious. It is not punishment. It is the most loyal part of your inner system, holding you to the only level it knows how to keep you alive within. Stay with the word loyal for a moment, because most teachings frame the patterns that keep us small as enemies, as obstacles to be defeated, as resistance to be overcome. The language is military. The implication is that there is a war inside you, and you must win it. This framing is the single most exhausting frame in the entire field of personal development. It pits you against yourself and then asks why you are so tired. The truth is that the floor is not your enemy. The floor was your first love. The floor was the part of you that promised, when you were too small to defend yourself, that it would never let you be hurt again by the thing that hurt you first. And it has kept that promise every single day of your life, without rest, without thanks, without ever being relieved of duty. The floor learned what was unsafe by watching you, by watching what happened to you and to the people around you. The first time more arrived than the inner economy could hold. Maybe it watched a fight in the kitchen the night your father got a bonus. Maybe it watched the silence after your mother received a compliment she did not know how to keep. Maybe it watched a child at school be punished for being too proud of a new pair of shoes. Maybe it watched, on a screen, the great public collapses that taught a whole generation that visibility was the opposite of safety. The floor watched and learned and made a decision. And the decision was, this much is safe. Not more. Not yet. And it has been enforcing that decision ever since, with a discipline that no conscious commitment of yours has ever matched. When you ask the floor to move, you are asking the most loyal part of yourself to revise its oldest contract. That is not a small request, and the floor will not revise the contract because you have read a book. It will not revise the contract because you have said an affirmation. It will not revise the contract because you have wanted, even with all your heart, for it to be different. The floor only revises the contract after it has watched you, in real time, hold more without collapse. After it has gathered enough evidence, in the body, that the new level is survivable. That is the only currency the floor accepts. Evidence. Lived, embodied, repeated evidence that the new is not a threat. And here is the part that is rarely said. The resonance floor is not lifted by effort. It is not lifted by visualization alone. It is not even lifted primarily by belief. It is lifted by repeated, embodied experience of holding more than the floor without collapse. The nervous system updates the floor only after it has lived, in the body, The felt sense that the new level did not kill it, that the new level did not get punished, that the new level did not destroy a relationship or invite a catastrophe or confirm an old fear. The floor moves only after the body has gathered enough evidence to revise the baseline. And that gathering takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes a very specific kind of attention that almost no abundance teaching gives the listener tools for. Let me name something about that attention, because it is the operational center of this entire conversation. The attention required to widen the floor is not the attention of effort. It is the attention of presence. The two feel completely different in the body, but they are constantly confused in the language of self-development. Effort is what happens when you try to make something be different. Presence is what happens when you stay with something exactly as it is, long enough that it has the chance to reveal what it actually is. Effort tightens. Presence softens. Effort fatigues. Presence restores, and the floor responds only to presence. The floor responds to being seen, not to being pushed. When you push the floor, it pushes back. When you see the floor, it begins, slowly, to relax its grip, because for the first time in your life, the floor is not being treated as an enemy that must be defeated. It is being treated as the loyal friend it has always been. This is what we will call frequency debt. Every time your life rises above the resonance floor and the nervous system contracts to return you to it, debt accumulates. Not financial debt, frequency debt. The gap between what you were broadcasting at your peak and what your floor allows you to hold. That gap is the actual cost. It is what tires you. It is what makes the cycles feel inescapable. It is what, after years of effort, leaves you exhausted in a way that cannot be slept off. Frequency debt accumulates in ways most people never recognize. Every time you reached for something larger and then, without knowing why, sabotaged it just before arrival, that was the floor cashing in on the debt. Every time an opportunity appeared and your first internal response was, "This is too good to be true," before any conscious analysis, that was the floor protecting its contract. Every time you held a feeling of expansion for a few minutes and then, almost automatically, found a way to deflate it, with a worry, with a comparison, with a critical voice that arrived from nowhere, that was the floor adjusting the level. The debt is paid, constantly, in the small currency of these adjustments. And the bill, over a lifetime, is enormous. It is the energy that could have built whole lives, spent instead on the daily labor of returning to a floor that was set by hands you cannot see and circumstances you did not choose. Frequency debt is what you have been carrying. It is the reason this work, until now, has felt heavier than it should. You were not lazy. You were not unfocused. You were not lacking in faith. You were paying interest on the gap between who you have become and what your floor is willing to recognize as safe. And no method on earth can clear that debt by adding more wanting on top of it. The only way the debt clears is by widening the floor itself. Now look at the cup again. The cup in the rain. The cup that was tilted by hands that did not know they were tilting it. Look at it more carefully this time. Because what we called the tilt is not only an angle, it is also a grip. The cup is not floating in the air. Something is holding it. And the hand that is holding it has been trembling for a very long time because the hand was never taught that it could carry weight. The tilt was not the cup's fault. The tilt was the tremor of the hand, and the tremor of the hand is what we have been calling the resonance floor. Sit with that image for a moment. Not the cup alone. The hand. The hand that has been holding the cup all your life. The hand that learned, before you could speak, that holding too much was dangerous. That to be visible with abundance was to be exposed. That to keep what arrived was to risk losing more than you started with. That hand is doing the best it can. That hand has never been thanked. That hand is the part of you we are speaking to now. There is a specific quality to the tremor of that hand, and it is worth naming because it will help you recognize it when you feel it in your daily life. The tremor is not constant. It does not shake all the time. It activates at the moment of arrival. The hand will hold a familiar amount steady for years without any tremor at all. But the instant something larger arrives, the instant a deposit posts that is higher than usual, the instant a check arrives that is unexpected, the instant a generous offer comes from someone you did not solicit, the tremor begins. And it begins so subtly that most people interpret it as excitement. It is not excitement. Excitement opens the chest. The tremor closes the chest, just a little, in the place behind the sternum, just enough that the breath becomes a fraction shallower without your noticing. That is the floor activated. That is the hand beginning to shake. That is the resonance floor preparing to do its work of returning you to the level it recognizes as safe. If you watch for that subtle closing, in the first second after good news arrives, you will begin to catch the floor in the act. And catching the floor in the act is the first step of widening it. Because the floor does not change when you ignore it. The floor changes when you notice it, gently, without trying to make it stop. You simply notice. Oh, the closing is happening. The tremor is starting. The contract is being enforced. And in the noticing, without any other intervention, something begins to shift. Because the floor, like every part of your nervous system, responds to being witnessed. The witnessing itself is the medicine, not the analysis, not the corrective story, not the affirmation that follows. The simple, kind, accurate witnessing of what is happening. This is why so much of the abundance work that has failed for you was failing. It was trying to override the tremor with stronger and stronger affirmations instead of meeting the tremor with the only thing that could actually move it, which is presence. The affirmations did not fail because they were false. They failed because they were aimed at the wrong moment. They were aimed at the moment of asking. The moment that matters is the moment of arrival. The moment the floor activates. The moment the tremor begins. That is the moment that requires your attention. And almost no method has ever pointed you at that moment, because almost no method understood that the moment of arrival, not the moment of asking, is where the law actually operates. Money is not testing your worth. It is testing your capacity to stay. That is the sentence I want you to carry with you for the rest of this audio. Not as a slogan, as a key. Because every time you have lost money, the question was not whether you deserved it. The question was whether the nervous system could stay present with it long enough for the floor to adjust. And every time the answer was no, the money left, not as judgment, but as relief. The relief of returning to a known level. The relief, even, of confirmation. Yes, this is who I am. Yes, this is what I can hold. Yes, the world is as I expected it to be. Relief in the inner economy is more powerful than desire. The nervous system will choose the relief of the familiar over the discomfort of the unfamiliar almost every time, even when the unfamiliar is what you have consciously asked for. This is not a flaw of your psychology. It is the architecture of every nervous system that has ever existed. And it is why the work of abundance is not, primarily, a work of attraction. It is a work of expanding the bandwidth of what feels safe to keep. Notice what is happening in your body right now as you hear this. There may be a kind of tiredness rising, a specific kind of tiredness, not the tiredness of the day, but the tiredness of years. The tiredness of having tried, in good faith, things that could not have worked because they were aimed at the wrong layer. If that tiredness is rising now, do not push it away. It is not weakness. It is the body finally being allowed to admit how long it has been carrying the gap. Let it rise. It does not have to mean anything. It only has to be allowed. There is a particular quality to this tiredness that deserves to be named. It is not the tiredness of a long day. It is not the tiredness of physical labor. It is closer to what some traditions have called the tiredness of unfinished mourning. The body has been carrying, for years, the unresolved grief of the gap between what it has wanted and what it has been able to hold. And because no one named the gap as grief, the body did not know it was allowed to grieve. It just carried the weight in the form of fatigue, and the fatigue became the background sensation of being you, and you forgot that this was not your natural state. You assumed everyone felt this. You assumed this was what adulthood was. You assumed this was what wanting more in a world that does not give it easily costs every person who tries. It is not what everyone feels. It is what people carrying frequency debt feel. And when the debt begins to clear, this specific tiredness does not lift gradually. It rises, first, into the conscious awareness, because the body finally trusts that you will not look away from it. And then, having been seen, it begins to dissolve. The dissolution is not dramatic. It is not a single moment of release. It is a slow restoration of a baseline energy that you had forgotten was yours. A morning, 6 weeks from now, you will wake up and notice that something is different about how the day feels, and you will not immediately be able to name what it is, and only later will you realize that the background hum of unfinished mourning is no longer there. That is the floor having moved. That is the debt having cleared. That is the work in its actual form, completing one of its quiet circuits. This is the moment, often, when something quietly shifts. Not in the bank account, in the grip of the hand that has been trembling around the cup for the first time in a long time is being seen. And what is seen can begin, slowly, to relax. Not all at once, not by force, by the simple, almost invisible act of being recognized. The receiving layer opens before the asking does, and the resonance floor rises before the receiving layer opens. There is an order to this work, and the order is the opposite of what almost every teacher has told you. You have been taught to ask first, to receive second, to expand the floor as a consequence. The actual order is to widen the floor first, which allows the receiving layer to open, which allows the asking to land. We have been working backwards. The whole field of personal abundance work, with rare exceptions, has been working backwards. And the people who succeed despite this are usually people whose floor was already higher when they began, and who did not need to widen it. The people for whom the work has not worked are not the people who failed at the method. They are the people whose floor was lower at the start, and who needed something the method was not designed to give them. If this is you, hear this clearly. You did not fail. You were given the wrong sequence. And what you needed first was never offered, because most teachers do not have words for it, because most teachers learned it implicitly and cannot teach what they cannot articulate. The teachers who came to this work with a high floor already in place, who learned the methods after the floor was already wide, can teach the methods perfectly well, but they cannot teach what they did not have to do, because they did not have to do it. They received the surface layer of the work and assumed the surface was the whole. And the audience that needed the deeper layer was left, again and again, with surface tools and no map to the depth. This is what we are doing here. We are putting the sequence in the right order. Floor first, receiving second, asking, finally, as the expression of a system that is now structurally ready to land what it calls in. Not because the asking is unimportant, because the asking, by itself, was never the bottleneck. Now we descend one more time, because the floor itself is not the deepest layer. The floor was set by something, built by something, inherited from something, and to widen it permanently, rather than temporarily, we have to look at what built it. This is the part of the conversation that most teachings refuse to enter, because it is the part where the listener has to feel something specific that the surface mind has been working very hard not to feel. If you are still here, if your chest has stayed open, if the tiredness has been allowed to rise without being pushed away, then you are ready for this layer. And if you are not, that is also fine, and you can return to it later, and it will be here, because this layer does not move. It waits. The resonance floor was built by what your lineage could hold, not what your lineage said, not what your lineage believed about money, what your lineage could actually, structurally, hold in the body without collapse. And in almost every line, going back as far as memory extends, there was a generation that could not hold what arrived. There was a great-grandfather who lost everything in a war. There was a great-grandmother who hid coins in the lining of a coat. There was an aunt who was given more than she could carry and broke under it. There was a father who watched his father be ruined and decided, without saying it, that ruin was the price of visibility. There was a mother who learned, from her mother, that to want too much was to invite the loss of what you already had. None of these stories were yours. All of them shaped your floor. The transmission did not happen through teaching. The transmission happened through proximity. You did not have to be told that money was dangerous. You watched a body, in close range, contract every time the subject came up. The contraction was not explained. The contraction was the explanation. Your nervous system, which was still developing, registered the contraction as data about the world. And the data went in deeper than any conscious teaching could ever reach. You learned, in the cells, what your parents had learned in their cells, what their parents had learned in theirs, in a transmission that did not require words and could not be undone by words. This is why the lineage carries weight in this work. Not because of mysticism, because of the biological reality of how nervous systems are formed. The first nervous system you co-regulated with was your mother's, often before you were born. Her stress was your stress. Her tension was the air your body learned to breathe. Her resonance floor was, by the time you arrived, already half of your resonance floor. And by the time you were old enough to form your own thoughts about money, the floor had already been set by years of pre-verbal regulation with the people closest to you. You did not have a chance to negotiate it. You inherited it the way you inherited the color of your eyes. Not because of fate, because of biology. You are not paying off your own frequency debt alone. You are paying off the accumulated debt of a line that, in many cases, never had the resources, internal or external, to clear it. And the part of you that has been so tired, so deeply tired, in a way that no rest seems to touch, is tired in part because of what it has been carrying for people it never met. This is not metaphor. This is not mysticism. This is the simple architecture of how nervous systems are built, by other nervous systems, across generations, in a chain that no one chose and almost no one has the awareness to interrupt. There is something specific that needs to be said about this, because it can become heavy if it is not held carefully. You did not consent to this inheritance. You are not responsible for the original debt. The people who came before you were doing the best they could with what they had, and most of them had very little. There is no blame here. There is only architecture. And the architecture is what it is. The lineage is not a court that has assigned you a sentence. The lineage is a long line of bodies, each one passing forward what it could not finish, hoping, often without language for the hope, that someone, eventually, would be born into circumstances stable enough to complete the unfinished work. That someone is, possibly, you. Not because you were chosen, because you happened to arrive at a moment in history when the tools to do this work, in this specific way, were finally available. The previous generations did not have these tools. They did the work they could. You have the tools they did not have. That is not a burden. That is an inheritance of possibility finally arriving at a generation that can use it. You are the one in your line who is interrupting it. That is what this hour, and many hours like it, is actually for. Not to make you rich, in the small sense. To clear the debt that was handed to you, that you did not incur, so that what flows through you from this point forward flows through a channel that is no longer narrowed by what your ancestors could not hold. The money that comes to you when this work is done is not just yours. It is the first generation of money your line has been able to hold without collapse. That is a much larger event than the language of personal abundance usually allows. And it is the real event underneath the smaller one. Notice, if you can, that this framing is the opposite of guilt. There is sometimes a tendency, in spiritual work, to feel guilty for what the ancestors did or did not do. To feel that one is supposed to redeem them, or honor them, or make peace with them in a way that becomes another form of burden. That is not what is being offered here. What is being offered is the simple recognition that you are a node in a long network, that the network has been carrying frequency debt for a very long time, and that you happen to be the node where the debt can begin to clear. There is no obligation to do this work. There is only the option. And the option is available because you have already lived enough of the consequences of the debt to know that something has to be different. Look at the cup again. The cup that you thought was your cup. The hand that you thought was your hand. The tremor that you thought was your tremor. None of it began with you. All of it ends with you, if you choose. The cup can be held differently in this generation. The hand can be thanked and softened and taught a new grip. The tremor can be allowed to finish itself in your body instead of being passed forward into the body of someone you have not yet met who would otherwise inherit it from you. This is the deeper meaning of the work, and it is why, when this work begins to move, it does not only change your bank account, it changes the line. Take a breath here. Not because I am telling you to, because the body is asking for one. The chest has been holding more than it usually holds. The information has been arriving at a depth that requires the lungs to make space for it. Let the breath come, and let it go, and let the next one come, and let it go. And notice that something in the room around you, in the air, in the quality of the silence between these sentences, feels slightly different than it did at the beginning of this audio. That difference is not poetic. It is real. It is the receiving layer beginning to soften. It is the floor beginning to consider that it might be safe to widen by a millimeter. It is the hand beginning to feel the warmth of being seen. Money is not testing your worth. It is testing your capacity to stay. And the staying, it turns out, is not a willpower event. It is a nervous system event. It is the slow, gentle, repeated practice of allowing the body to be present with more than its old floor without collapsing. It is the small daily decision to feel the discomfort of expansion without flinching back into the familiar. It is the practice of receiving compliments without deflecting, of accepting unexpected generosity without immediately calculating how to repay it, of letting good news land in the chest for 3 full seconds before the mind begins to qualify it. These are not small practices. These are the practices that move the floor. And no method that skips them will produce a lasting change, no matter how loudly it promises otherwise. There is a quality to the practice of staying that I want to name with care, because it is the operational heart of everything we have built so far. Staying does not mean enduring. Staying does not mean gritting the teeth and refusing to leave. Staying, in this context, is much softer than that. Staying is the practice of remaining inside the body while something larger than the floor is happening. It is the practice of feeling the chest contract and not immediately leaving the body through thought, through distraction, through the small mental exit doors the nervous system has built up over years of avoidance. The exit doors are familiar. They are comfortable. They have their own gravity. And staying means noticing the exit door and choosing, for one more breath, not to walk through it. This is what most people miss when they hear the word presence in spiritual literature. Presence is not a state. Presence is a decision. Presence is what happens when the body is allowed to remain in contact with whatever is actually occurring, including the parts of what is occurring that the mind would prefer to escape. And it turns out that escaping the moment of arrival, of good things, is one of the most consistent, invisible habits a nervous system carrying frequency debt has developed. We learn to escape, very young, the moment of having something. Because the moment of having something was the moment when the loss became thinkable. To never fully have, it was to never fully risk losing it. And the floor, in its loyalty, taught us this exit door early, and we have been walking through it ever since. To stay is to stop walking through that exit door. Not all at once, not perfectly, just slightly more often than before. Just one extra second of presence with what has arrived. Just one moment of allowing the good thing to land in the chest before the mind begins its work of disclaiming it. Each of those moments is a deposit into the new floor. Each of those moments is a small piece of evidence the nervous system files away. And over time, the file grows. And one day, the file is large enough that the floor itself revises its contract. And the new contract allows for more. Let me name, now, the central understanding that everything so far has been arranging itself around. Not as a revelation, as a recognition. Because by now, if you have stayed with this, you already know what is about to be said. Your nervous system is already preparing for it. The mind will hear it as if it were new. The body will hear it as if it were a return. You are not magnetizing money. You are dismantling the interference that has been pushing it away at the moment of contact. Let those sentences sit in the air for a moment. Read them again, in your own mind, slowly. Notice what happens in the body when the implication arrives. Not in the head. In the body. Because the body knows immediately whether a sentence is the truth it has been waiting for or whether it is another decoration. And this sentence, if it is what I believe it is, will produce something specific. A small loosening. A quiet exhale. A sensation in the chest that did not exist a moment ago. That sensation is recognition. That sensation is the body confirming what the mind has just understood. That is the law. That is what the title of this audio was pointing at in the language the surface allowed. The law is not a force that pulls. The law is the absence of the force that has been pushing. When the interference is dismantled, what remains is what was always moving toward you. And what was always moving toward you was not just money. It was every form of what the field offers to those who are open enough to receive it. Money is one expression of that openness. Love is another. Recognition is another. Peace is another. They all run through the same receiving layer. They all return to the same resonance floor. They all clear, or do not clear, through the same lineage of debt. And when one of them begins to flow, the others begin to flow. Because it was never about the specific substance. It was about the channel. The field does not respond to wanting. It responds to the tuning underneath the wanting. And the tuning underneath the wanting is what we have been working on this whole time, without ever saying its name until now. Sit with that. Not the idea. The fact. The fact that everything you have been calling abundance work, when it was real, was tuning work. And the fact that tuning work, when it is done at the level of the floor, changes not only your relationship to money, but the structure of what you are able to perceive as available to you. Because what we perceive as available is the function of what the floor allows us to register. People at different floors do not see the same world. The opportunities visible from one floor are literally invisible from another. Not metaphorically invisible, functionally invisible. The eyes pass over them. The mind does not register them as relevant. The nervous system filters them out as not for me, before the conscious mind has even formed a thought about them. Widen the floor, and the world that was always there becomes visible. Not because the world changed, because the filter widened. This is one of the strangest discoveries of this work, and it is worth pausing with. The opportunities you needed have already passed by you. Many of them, possibly hundreds. They appeared in your field of perception, and they did not register, because the floor at the time did not allow them to be recognized as available. You did not consciously reject them. You did not see them. They were invisible to a system that had been calibrated to a level beneath them. And as the floor widens, this becomes one of the more humbling realizations. Not in a way that creates regret, in a way that creates a kind of awe at how complete the filter has been. How much was always there, how carefully the inner system was filtering it out, in fidelity to a contract you did not know was being enforced. The good news, and it is genuinely good news, is that opportunities of the right kind, when they belong to your life, tend to return in different forms. The field is not a single moment. The field is a continuous offering. What was missed in one form will appear in another when the system is ready to register it. You have not lost the opportunities forever. You have only postponed your encounter with them until the level at which they become visible. And when the level rises enough that they become visible, they will appear, and they will feel as though they have arrived for the first time, when in fact they have been waiting for you to arrive at the floor from which they could be seen. This is what people mean, in the deepest sense, when they say that someone's life transformed. The outer events did not necessarily explode in a moment. The filter widened, and what was always there began to be received. And as it was received, the floor widened further. And as the floor widened, more became visible. And the spiral, which had been running downward for years, began to run upward. Not because the field changed, because the channel cleared. There is a phrase that has been used in older traditions for what we are describing, and although the phrase will sound strange in modern ears, it is worth introducing because it captures something the modern language cannot. The phrase is the original frequency, the frequency you were broadcasting before you were taught to broadcast anything else, the frequency that was present in the body before any of the interruptions were added. The original frequency is not a future achievement. It is not a high vibration you have to climb up to. It is the baseline that was there before the floor was set. And the work of widening the floor is not, ultimately, about reaching a new state. It is about returning to a state that was already yours, before the line of nervous systems, before you began encoding their own debt into your body. The original frequency is what you were before you learned to be afraid of having, before you learned to flinch at the moment of arrival, before you learned that visibility was the opposite of safety, before you learned that wanting more was a kind of disease. Before any of it, there was a body. There was a being inside that body. And that body and that being were not yet afraid of what they could hold. The original frequency is the memory of that. And every nervous system, no matter how heavily encoded with debt, carries the trace of that original signal somewhere. It is not gone. It cannot be gone. It can only be buried under the noise of being told who you were allowed to become. To widen the floor is to begin to hear the original frequency again, not by adding something, by subtracting the interference. The signal was never lost. It was always still being broadcast, underneath everything. The work is not to manufacture a new signal. The work is to clear enough of the static that the original signal can be heard again, by the body itself, which has been longing to remember what it sounded like. This is the part of the conversation that some people will hear as religious and others will hear as scientific, and both readings are accurate. The religious reading would say that you were created in a state of fullness and have been recovering it. The scientific reading would say that the nervous system has a baseline of regulation that precedes its conditioned overlays and can, with careful work, be restored. Both are pointing at the same thing. The thing itself is not religious or scientific. The thing itself is simply true, and it is true in your body right now, whether you frame it in either language or in neither. You are at the beginning of that clearing, right now, in this hour, in this exact moment. Something has shifted in the last 40 minutes. You may not be able to name it. The mind may want to dismiss it. The old voice may be already preparing the argument that nothing has changed, that this is all words, that tomorrow will be the same as today. Let that voice speak if it must. It is not the deepest voice in you. The deepest voice in you is the one that knew, before this audio began, that something like this was the missing piece. That voice is quieter, but it is older, and it does not argue. It only recognizes. And it has been recognizing, sentence by sentence, the entire time you have been listening. Tomorrow, when you wake, the bank account will likely show the same number it showed today. Do not let that disappoint you. The bank account is the last thing to change in this work. It is the visible surface of a structure that changes from underneath. What will be different tomorrow is something smaller and more important. You will open the banking app, and in the half second before the number appears, your chest will move differently than it has moved for years. The contraction will be a little less. The grip of the hand will be a little softer. The tilt of the cup will be a little corrected. And that small difference, repeated daily, is the actual mechanism by which the visible surface eventually shifts. This is what abundance work, done correctly, looks like from the inside. Not lightning, not miracles in the cinematic sense. Slow, persistent, almost imperceptible widening in the layers underneath the visible, until one day the visible itself catches up and the bank account, the relationships, the opportunities, the body, the energy, the time, all begin to reflect a structure that has been quietly rebuilding itself in the dark for some time. The people in your life who have undergone this kind of change usually cannot describe how it happened. They will tell you it was a slow accumulation of small shifts, none of which felt dramatic in the moment. They will tell you that at some point they stopped being able to find the line between the old life and the new life because the change was a gradient rather than a wall. They will tell you that the bank account, when it finally began to reflect the new floor, did so almost casually, without ceremony, as if the universe had been waiting for them to be ready and was simply offering what had always been queued up. None of these descriptions sound like spiritual marketing. All of them sound like quiet facts. That is because the actual experience of this work, when it is working, is quiet. The drama belongs to the methods that do not work. The methods that do work are remarkably undramatic. What you are doing tonight is the beginning of that quiet. The quiet that exists underneath the noise of all the methods that have not been able to reach you. The quiet that is not absence of sound, but the original frequency itself, becoming audible for the first time since the interruptions began. Listen for it. Not with the ears, with the body. The body knows the sound. It has been waiting to hear it for a very long time. And as the quiet settles, something specific begins to happen with the relationship to time. The urgency that has driven so much of your wanting begins to soften. The sense that you need this to happen immediately, that you cannot wait another year, that something is running out, begins to release. Not because the desire has weakened, because the desperation has lifted. The desire is still there. The desire is, perhaps, clearer than it has ever been. But the desperation, which was the floor pushing against the asking, is no longer needed. The floor is widening. The push is no longer required. And without the push, the desire can simply be what it is, without the exhausting overlay of needing it to resolve before some imagined deadline. This is what people mean when they speak of effortless manifestation, although the phrase has been so overused that it has lost most of its meaning. The effortlessness is not a magical absence of work. It is the absence of the specific work that was never producing results in the first place. The work of forcing, the work of pushing, the work of trying to drag the floor up by sheer wanting. That work was the source of the exhaustion. When the floor begins to widen on its own, through the practices we have named, that work is no longer required. What is required is something completely different. Presence, staying, receiving. The small daily acts that update the nervous system's understanding of what is safe to hold. None of these are effortless in the sense of being passive. All of them feel completely different from the exhausting work that did not produce results. The new work feels like itself. The old work felt like a war. Notice if there is any part of you, right now, that is mourning the war. It can happen. The war was a familiar companion. The war gave you a sense of purpose. The war made you feel that you were doing something, and the prospect of stopping the war, of putting down the weapons of trying, can produce a strange grief, even when you know the war was not winning anything. This is the floor speaking again. It has organized so much of your identity around the fight that the cessation of the fight feels like a small death. It is not a death. It is the beginning of a life that does not require you to be at war with yourself. But the floor does not know this yet. The floor will only know it after enough time has passed in the new way that the old way begins to seem like a strange dream. Let me name what the central understanding implies for the specific weight you arrived with tonight. The weight of years of effort. The weight of methods that did not work. The weight of watching others succeed at what you could not seem to make stick. That weight was not a verdict on you. That weight was a misalignment between what you were doing and where the actual problem lived. You were treating a deep structural issue with surface tools, and you were doing it with such persistence, such faith, such genuine effort, that the failure to produce results felt like a personal failure. It was not. It was the predictable outcome of any honest person trying to solve a problem at the wrong layer. The persistence was beautiful. The faith was real. The effort was honorable. None of that was wasted. All of it was the slow accumulation of evidence that something deeper was at play. And now that the deeper thing has been named, the same persistence, the same faith, the same effort, applied to the right layer, will produce results of a kind you have not yet imagined. This is the moment, often, when listeners feel something break open in the chest. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, almost familiar way. The way a door that has been stuck for years finally moves on its hinges, with a small sigh, as if it had been waiting for the right hand to touch it. If that has happened for you, anywhere in the last several minutes, you will recognize it. If it has not yet happened, do not force it. The door opens in its own time. Some doors open in the first listen. Some doors open in the third. Some doors open weeks later, when you were doing something completely unrelated, and a sentence from this hour returns to you with a force it did not have when you first heard it. Trust the door. The door knows. We are halfway through the deepest part of this work. The understanding has been delivered. The structure has been named. What remains is to bring the understanding into the territory of the specific, into the practical doors that open as this work continues, into the dimensions of the inner economy that are about to become visible to you for the first time, into the scale at which this work connects to something larger than your personal account, and back down again, into the specific moments of tomorrow morning, the next deposit, the next opportunity, the next moment of arrival. Stay with the breath. Stay with the chest. Stay with whatever has moved in the last few minutes. And let us continue, gently, into what comes next. There are 3 doors that open as this work continues, and I want to name them now, so you will recognize them when they appear, because they will appear. And when they do, the conscious mind will often miss them, while the deeper system is going through the doorway. 3 doors. An exact number. Not because the inner economy is limited to 3, but because these three are the ones that open first, predictably, in the right sequence, when the floor begins to widen. Watch for them. They are how you will know the work is happening before the bank account is willing to confirm it. The first door is the door of what you have spent without knowing. The frequency debt, paid invisibly for years, will begin to surface as a kind of grief. Not depression. Grief. The grief of realizing how much energy went into holding a floor that was not yours. The grief of seeing, in retrospect, how many opportunities your old filter made invisible. The grief of meeting, for the first time, the version of yourself that has been waiting underneath. This grief is not a setback. It is the receipt for the work. Let it move through. It clears faster than it seems. There is a particular shape to this first grief that deserves to be named, because it is easy to misinterpret it and treat it as a problem to be solved. It feels, often, like a delayed mourning for things that did not happen. You might find yourself, unexpectedly, getting quiet in the middle of an ordinary afternoon and realizing that you are sad about a job you did not take 7 years ago, or a relationship you did not allow to deepen, or a financial opportunity you waved away without considering it. The sadness is not coming from nowhere. It is the floor releasing the residue of choices it made on your behalf, choices that you were not consciously involved in, choices that have been quietly costing you ever since. The release of that residue can feel like grief, because it is grief. Real grief. Grief for the unlived parts of a life. And the only correct response to it is to let it move. Not to fix it. Not to redo the past. Not to torture yourself with what might have been. Just to allow the body to feel, for the first time, what it has been quietly carrying. The grief, once felt, releases. The energy that was bound up in the unfelt grief becomes available. And the available energy is what fuels the next phase of the work. There is something specific to notice about the energy of unfelt grief, because once you have noticed it, you will start to recognize how much of it has been lodged in the people around you and in yourself for most of your life. Unfelt grief does not stay still. It accumulates as low background fatigue. It accumulates as a vague sense of being older than you actually are. It accumulates as a quiet resignation about what is possible. People walking around with large amounts of unfelt grief about their lives are usually the people who seem to have given up, without having ever made a conscious decision to give up. They simply stopped looking up at what might be possible, because looking up had become too painful, because looking up activated the grief of what had not been allowed to land. When that grief begins to release, the looking up returns, slowly, gently, without ceremony. You will catch yourself, one day, noticing something beautiful, and noticing also that the noticing did not immediately come with the familiar ache. That is the grief having moved through. That is the door, having closed gently behind you into a room where the looking up is possible again. The second door is the door of what you have withheld from yourself out of fear of losing it. The signal interruption. This appears as a strange willingness, suddenly, to spend small amounts on yourself for the first time in years without immediate guilt. To take a taxi instead of waiting. To order the better option on the menu. To say yes to something pleasurable without justifying it. These will feel like small acts. They are not small. They are the floor widening in real time through behavior. The nervous system is learning by doing that holding more does not equal punishment. Each small permission widens the channel. Each small permission is the work made visible. The reason these small permissions are so important is that the nervous system updates its sense of what is safe primarily through behavior, not through thought. You can think about being someone who allows themselves nice things, and the thinking does not change the floor. You can affirm the worthiness of having nice things, and the affirming does not change the floor. The floor changes when you actually have a nice thing, and your body has the experience of having it, and nothing terrible happens. After enough repetitions of nothing terrible happening, the floor revises its model of what is dangerous. This is why the second door, when it opens through small acts that seem trivial from the outside. The smallness is the point. The body is not asking for permission to receive $1 million. The body is asking for permission to receive the slightly better coffee, to accept the compliment without deflection, to wear the thing you have been saving for a special occasion that never seems to come. The body is doing the math on whether the slightly larger version is survivable. And every act of allowing the slightly larger version, without sabotaging it, is a data point that the math uses to revise itself. Watch for the moments, in the days ahead, when you find yourself spontaneously offering yourself something small that the old version of you would have denied or postponed. Do not analyze the moment. Do not question whether you have earned it. Do not let the old voice convince you that this is irresponsible. The old voice is the floor speaking in its familiar register, trying to enforce the old contract. Notice the voice. Thank it for its loyalty. And accept the small thing anyway. Each acceptance is a tiny revision of the contract. Over weeks, the revisions accumulate. Over months, the new contract begins to be the default. Over a year, the version of you who would not have accepted these small things will feel like a stranger you used to know. There is a danger to be aware of here, because the second door can be confused with impulsivity, and impulsivity is not the same thing as widening. Widening is the small, deliberate acceptance of pleasures that the body has been refusing. Impulsivity is the chaotic discharge of suppressed energy in ways that often produce the very loss the floor was afraid of. The difference between them is presence. A widening choice is made with the body fully present, savoring the pleasure of the choice, allowing it to land. An impulsive choice is made with the body absent, often as a way of avoiding something else, and the pleasure does not actually land because no one is home to receive it. If you find yourself, in this phase of the work, suddenly making large purchases without joy, that is not widening. That is the floor making a controlled discharge to preserve itself. Slow down. Return to the small. The small is where the actual widening lives. The third door is the door of what the field tried to give you and you returned. The abundance membrane. This appears as a sudden, almost embarrassing memory of moments in your life when something good was offered and you said no. And you said no so quickly that you did not even register it as a no. And now, with the new floor, you can see clearly that it was a no. And you can feel, also, the strange relief of forgiving yourself for it. You did not know. The receiving layer was contracted. The floor was lower. You did the best you could with the channel you had. And now, the channel is different. And the next time something is offered, the no will not arrive automatically. There will be a half second of choice. And in that half second, you will be able to say yes for the first time in a long time. That half second is the work made conscious. The third door is, in some ways, the most useful of the three, because it changes what is possible going forward. The first door clears the past. The second door practices the present. The third door restructures the future, because the future, in the inner economy, is built out of the half seconds in which you say yes or no to what is offered. Most of those half seconds, for most of your life, have been preceded by a no so automatic that no choice was actually occurring. The body said no before the mind even knew there was something to consider. The third door, when it opens, introduces a pause. A small pause, often less than a second, but real. A pause in which the old automatic no can be noticed. And once noticed, it can be questioned. And once questioned, it can sometimes be revised in real time. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough that, over months, the rate of yeses begins to rise. And the rising rate of yeses changes the shape of the field around you, because the field is, in part, the accumulated record of what you have agreed to receive. There are people who have lived their whole lives saying no to almost everything offered without ever realizing they were doing it. From the outside, they appear unlucky. From the inside, they have been refusing, half second by half second, the constant offerings of the field. The field is generous. The field has always been generous. The field does not punish the no. The field simply registers the no and continues offering in slightly different forms, hoping eventually that the no will become a yes. When the yeses begin to occur, the field responds with a kind of joy that is hard to describe. It is as if a long correspondence has finally been answered. The replies, when they come with energy. And the next round of offerings is larger and warmer and more specifically tailored to what the system can now hold. This is the actual mechanism of what is sometimes called manifestation. It is not the field giving you what you ask for. It is the field continuing its constant generosity, finally being met with a receiving that allows the generosity to land. These three doors are not theoretical. They are operational. They will appear in the days and weeks ahead in forms that will sometimes be obvious and sometimes be disguised as ordinary moments. Watch for them. Greet them when they come. Each one is a piece of evidence that the floor is moving. And now we shift scale, briefly, because the conversation we have been having, intimate as it has been, is also part of something larger. Every nervous system that widens its floor of receiving contributes, in a way that is real and not sentimental, to the widening of the floor of the species. This is not because of some mystical interconnection that requires you to believe in anything specific. It is because nervous systems regulate each other in proximity, in relationship, in the field. Every person you encounter after your floor widens encounters a slightly different field. And in that field, their own floor has slightly more room to move. You will not have to teach them anything. You will not have to explain anything. The widening is contagious. The contracted state is also contagious, which is part of what has kept this difficult for so long. We have been swimming in the contracted state of generations. And the cure is not to lecture each other. The cure is to widen in the body, one by one, until the field itself shifts. Think for a moment about what this implies for the children in your life. The children you have, or the children you do not have, or the children who pass through your field as nieces, nephews, neighbors, students. Every child you encounter is in the process of having their floor set. Their nervous system is, in this very moment, calibrating its sense of what is safe to hold, based partly on what they encounter in the bodies around them. A child who spends time with a person whose floor is wide encounters a slightly wider possibility for their own floor. They do not learn this consciously. They learn it through co-regulation, through the simple fact that being near a wider nervous system gives their own nervous system permission to expand. You do not have to teach a child about money. You have to be, in proximity to that child, a body that holds resources without contracting. And the child will learn, in the cells, what you are demonstrating. This is the deeper mechanism of inheritance. It does not require legacy. It requires presence. And the presence you can offer to the children in your field after this work is something they could not have received from the version of you who arrived at this audio tonight. This applies, also, to the adults around you. The widening you do in your own body affects the rooms you walk into. It changes the quality of the conversations you have. It changes the kind of opportunities people, half-consciously, bring to you. People bring to a wide nervous system the offerings they would not bring to a narrow one. They do not know they are doing this. They simply feel, in your presence, that more is possible, and the more becomes available in the form of what they offer you. This is why people whose lives are transforming often describe the transformation as if the world around them is changing. It is not exactly that the world is changing. It is that the world is responding to a body that is now broadcasting a different signal. The response was always going to be there. The signal was the only variable, and the signal is what you are working on, in this hour, in the most direct way possible. That is the cosmic scale of this work. The intimate scale is what happens tomorrow morning, in the half-second before the app opens. Both scales are real. Both scales are the same work, seen from different distances. And the work does not require you to choose between them. You only have to do the small thing, and the large thing follows. Let us return now to the cost we named at the beginning. The exhaustion of trying. The ache of almost. The specific tiredness of years spent in good faith, with methods that were aimed at the wrong layer. Look at that cost now, with the eyes of everything we have built since. It was not failure. It was instruction. Every almost was the floor showing you exactly where it was set. Every loss was the receiving layer telling you the truth about its grip. Every method that did not work was a precise map of what was not yet being addressed. The cost was high. I will not minimize the cost. Years of your life. Energy that could have gone elsewhere. Confidence that took hits it did not need to take. The cost was real. And the cost was also, in retrospect, the most accurate diagnostic you could have received if anyone had known how to read it. Now you know how to read it. The map you were drawing, by accident, for years, is finally legible. And the same map that recorded the failure is the map that shows you the way forward. Not as redemption of the wasted time, as recognition that the time was not wasted. It was the long, slow gathering of data that this hour required to make sense. Without those years, this hour would have been a series of pretty sentences. Because of those years, this hour is recognition. And recognition, as we said at the beginning, is what changes the body. There is a particular sentence that some listeners need to hear at this point, and I want to offer it now, because if it is yours, you will feel it land. The sentence is this: the years were not wasted. They were the price of arriving at this moment with a body capable of hearing what is being said. The version of you who needed this 5 years ago could not have heard it the way you can hear it now. The hearing required the suffering, not because suffering is necessary as a moral lesson, but because the specific kind of recognition that is happening tonight only becomes possible after the body has lived through enough of the wrong methods to recognize, in its own cells, what is finally the right one. The wrongness of the methods was the teacher, and the teacher, however painful, has done its work. You are here. You are listening. You are receiving. The rest of the work is much faster than what came before. The frequency debt is not paid by adding more wanting. It is paid by gently widening the floor, day by day, breath by breath, half second by half second, until the floor has risen enough that the debt is no longer being added to, and what was paid forward by all the years of trying begins, at last, to arrive in a system that can hold it. Let me speak directly to something that many listeners feel at exactly this point in this kind of work. There can be a fear that the new floor will not hold, that after the audio ends, the old patterns will return, and the temporary opening of tonight will be lost. This fear is itself the floor speaking. It is the floor's way of warning you that change is being threatened and offering you, gently, the comfort of returning to the familiar. The fear is not lying about its concern. The floor does, in fact, have habits that will reassert themselves. The opening of 1 hour does not undo decades of conditioning in one session. The patterns will return. They will return tomorrow, and the day after, and many days after that. This is not a failure of the work. This is the work. The point of the work is not to never have the old patterns again. The point of the work is to develop, over time, the capacity to notice the patterns when they arrive and to choose, slightly more often than before, not to follow them all the way home. Each time you notice the pattern and do not follow it, the floor revises slightly. Each time you follow the pattern anyway, the floor does not lose what has been gained. Floors do not lose ground from a single relapse. Floors lose ground from years of not noticing. As long as you are noticing, even when you cannot yet change the behavior, you are doing the work. The noticing itself is the practice, and the noticing, repeated, becomes choice, and the choice, repeated, becomes the new pattern. There is no failure in this process. There is only the speed at which it unfolds, and the speed is yours to set, gently, without urgency. There is one more dimension of expansion to name before we close this section, and it is the dimension of relationship. Because the floor does not only affect your relationship with money, it affects every relationship in your life. The same receiving layer that contracts at the moment money arrives also contracts at the moment love arrives, recognition arrives, support arrives, kindness arrives. The contraction is the same. The substance arriving is different, but the contraction is the same. So as the floor widens, you will find that the receiving in other domains widens as well. People will offer you support, and you will, for the first time, allow it to land. People will compliment you, and you will, for the first time, take the compliment in without immediately deflecting. Someone will love you, and the love will reach a place in your chest that previous love could not reach, because the receiving layer was contracted in a way that did not allow the love to arrive at full depth. These changes will happen alongside the financial changes, often before them, and they will surprise you with how connected they all are. The connection, of course, is not surprising once you have understood the central understanding. There is one channel. The channel either allows what is moving toward you to land, or it does not. The substance that is moving toward you varies, but the channel is the same, and widening the channel is the only practice that matters. Every other practice you have been taught, when it has worked, has been a way of widening the channel through a particular doorway. But the channel itself is the unifying thing. And once you are working at the level of the channel, all the doorways begin to open at once. There is a final reframe of the cost I want to offer before we move into the close. The cost of not doing this work has been higher than you have allowed yourself to feel. Not the financial cost. The bigger cost. The cost of how much of your one life has been spent in the war with your own receiving. The cost of the relationships that could have been deeper if you had been able to let the love in fully. The cost of the work that could have been larger if you had been able to receive the opportunities that were always passing through your field. The cost of the simple, daily experience of being alive in a body that could have been resting in the original frequency, rather than working, exhausted, against an internal contract you did not write. That cost is real. I name it not to add weight, but because the recognition of the cost is also the recognition of what is now available. Everything that the cost has been paying for is now in process of being recovered, not all at once, but in process. The hours of war can give way to hours of presence. The relationships can deepen. The work can grow. The body can begin to rest in something other than the constant low-grade alertness of frequency debt. And the bank account, when it begins to reflect the new floor, will be only the most visible piece of a much larger restoration. You did not come here for the bank account alone. You came here for the original state, the state your body remembered before the floor was set, the state that has been the silent companion of every desire you have ever had, even when you did not know its name. You wanted the money, yes, but what you wanted underneath the money was the feeling of safety in your own body, the feeling of not having to fight, the feeling of the chest being open, the feeling of the breath being deep, the feeling of the day being more than the management of survival. That feeling is what this work returns. The money follows. The money has always followed. The feeling is what comes first. Look at the cup again, one more time. The cup is the right shape. The rain is generous. The angle is being corrected. And the hand, finally, is being thanked for everything it has done and being told, gently, that it is safe now to hold a little more. Just a little. Not all at once. Just enough that the next drop, when it falls, does not roll down the outside. Just enough that the next opportunity, when it arrives, does not slide past you while you are still recovering from the last one. Just enough that the next sum of money, when it lands, finds a container that has expanded by exactly the smallest possible increment, which is the only increment the nervous system can absorb without rebellion. This is the work. It is not glamorous. It is not instant. It is not a single ceremony performed once, and then it is done. It is the daily, almost invisible widening of the floor, the gentle thanking of the hand, the slow correction of the angle. And it is the only work that has ever actually moved the underlying reality of anyone's relationship to money. Every story you have ever heard of someone who broke through their financial pattern was, underneath the surface story, a story of this work. They may not have known they were doing it, but it was being done. And here, something arrives that the earlier concepts could not yet name. The cup is not separate from you. The hand is not separate from you. The floor is not separate from you. They are all you. And the field that is sending the rain is not separate from you either. The whole image, which seemed to be about external water arriving at external containment, was never external. It was always one system, looking at itself from different angles. The field is you. The cup is you. The hand is you. The tilt is you. The thirst is you. And the rain that you have been waiting for, with so much ache for so many years, is also you. There is no part of this picture that is not you. And when the picture realizes it is one picture, the rain stops being something that has to arrive. It starts being something that already is, simply present, in different forms, in different places, waiting for the part of you that calls itself the cup to recognize that it was never thirsty for what was missing. It was thirsty for the recognition that what it was waiting for was the same substance it was made of. This is where the conversation about magnetism begins to change its meaning one final time. You are not magnetizing money. There is no force called magnetism that pulls coins through the air toward you. The word magnetic in the title of this audio was the language closest to the truth that the surface culture could accept. The truth underneath the language is something else. The truth is that the dismantling of interference is what creates the appearance of magnetism. Stop interrupting what is already moving toward you, and the world will call you magnetic. You will not have pulled anything. You will have stopped pushing it away. And the way you have been pushing it away, mostly, is not in any action. It is in the half-second of contraction before arrival. It is in the grip of the hand that learned, long ago, that holding too much was unsafe. It is in the resonance floor that returns you, faithfully, to the level your nervous system has agreed to recognize as home. We are nearing the end of this hour. There is no urgency in the end. The end is not a destination. The end is only the place where the words stop and the body continues. What continues in the body after the words stop is the actual content of this audio. The words were the trigger. The continuation is the work. Before we move into the close, I want to spend some time in the practical territory that opens once the central understanding has landed. Because the understanding itself, however precise, is only the beginning. The understanding is the map. The map is not the territory. And the territory is where you will live, starting tomorrow morning, when this audio is over and the actual work begins to happen in the ordinary moments of your ordinary days. Let us walk through what the first month of this work looks like from the inside, because knowing what to expect changes how the work lands. The mind tends to interpret unexpected experiences as either evidence of progress or evidence of failure, depending on its mood. If you know in advance what is likely to happen, you will be less reactive when it does, and the work will move faster because you will not be wasting energy on misinterpretation. In the first week, almost nothing visible will change. This is the most important week to survive because the mind will look for evidence and find none, and the old voice will say, "See, this was another set of pretty words. Nothing has actually shifted." Do not believe the old voice. The first week is the week the nervous system is processing what was received in the audio. It is integrating in the background, while the surface life continues as normal. The integration is real. It just is not yet visible. Trust the integration. Continue your life. Notice the small things only if they appear, without forcing them. In the second week, you may begin to notice a small change in the half-second before the banking app opens. The contraction will be slightly less. Or, more often, you will notice the contraction for the first time because previously it had been beneath conscious awareness. The noticing is the change. The noticing means the contraction is now available to the part of you that can begin to soften it. Do not try to soften it. Just notice. The noticing itself is the practice. The softening will happen in its own time from the noticing. In the third week, the first door may begin to open. Some piece of unfelt grief may surface, often in an unexpected moment, often disguised as a different feeling at first. You may find yourself sad about something that does not seem to connect to abundance work at all. This is the residue moving. Let it move. Cry if you can. Sit with it if you cannot. Do not analyze it. Do not try to make it about anything specific. Just let it be the wave that it is and let it pass through, and notice that on the other side of it, the body feels slightly lighter than it did before. In the fourth week, the second door may begin to open. You may catch yourself, without planning to, accepting something small that the old version of you would have refused. A friend offers to pay for lunch, and you say yes without the immediate calculation of how to repay. A coworker offers help, and you let them help. A small luxury becomes available, and you allow it. These moments will feel like nothing in the moment. They will feel, looking back, like the first measurable evidence that the floor has moved. The body has agreed, in these moments, to receive without contraction. And each agreement is a permanent revision of the floor. By the end of the first month, if you have stayed with the work, the third door may have opened at least once. You will have caught, in real time, the automatic no arriving at the threshold of something offered, and you will have paused for the first time instead of letting the no execute. The pause might not have produced a yes. It might have stayed a no. But the pause itself is the door. The door is the gap between the offering and the automatic refusal. The gap is what was not there before. The gap is the floor having widened enough that choice has become possible, where only reflex used to exist. These are not promises. These are descriptions of what tends to happen when the work is engaged. The pace varies by person. Some move faster. Some move slower. Both are correct. The pace is not a measure of how committed you are. The pace is a measure of how much frequency debt is being cleared, and the amount of debt varies wildly between people based on the lineage they arrived with. People with deeper debt are not behind. They are clearing more. People with shallower debt are not ahead. They had less to clear. The work is the work. The pace is the pace. Comparison, as in most things, is the enemy of the actual progress. There is a practice I want to offer for the days ahead, because it is one of the simplest things you can do to support the widening of the floor, and it requires nothing but attention. The practice is this. Once a day, At any time, in any setting, pause for 10 seconds and notice what is in your field that you have already received. Not what is missing, what is present. The chair you are sitting in, the light in the room, the breath in your chest. The fact that you are not, at this moment, in physical danger. The fact that you have, at some point today, eaten something or drunk something. The fact that you are alive enough to be doing this work, whatever is present. The practice is not gratitude in the usual sense. The practice is not telling yourself that you are grateful. The practice is noticing what has, in fact, already arrived. Because part of what the receiving layer has been doing all this time is filtering out the awareness of what is already there. The filter has been calibrated to notice what is missing, because the floor was set at a level below the present moment, and the floor has been organizing your attention to confirm its setting. The practice of noticing what is present, briefly, every day, gives the floor evidence that more has already been received than the filter was registering. This evidence, over weeks, begins to revise the floor in a way that no affirmation ever could. 10 seconds. Once a day. That is the entire practice. Do not make it longer. Do not make it more elaborate. The simplicity is the point. The body learns through simple, repeated exposure to a different signal. The simpler the practice, the more reliably the body will engage with it. Elaborate practices fail because they require effort to maintain, and the effort itself contradicts the principle they were meant to teach. The practice we are describing requires almost no effort. It is closer to a remembering than to a doing. And the remembering, repeated, is enough. There is a second practice, equally simple, that supports the work from a different angle. When something good happens, of any size, pause for 3 breaths before moving on to the next thing. That is all. 3 breaths. The good thing might be small. A pleasant interaction. A compliment. An unexpected ease in something that is usually difficult. The size does not matter. The practice is to stay with the good thing for 3 breaths, instead of letting the mind immediately move to the next item on the list of things that are wrong or unfinished. This is the staying we described earlier, translated into a specific behavior. 3 breaths. The body needs 3 breaths to register that something good has actually happened. Less than 3 breaths, and the registration does not complete. The good thing slides past, unrecorded, and the inner economy continues to operate as if it had not occurred. 3 breaths is enough to make the registration land, and every landing is a deposit into the new floor. These 2 practices, 10 seconds of noticing and 3 breaths of staying, are more powerful than they sound. They are not all of the work. They are the seeds of the work. And the seeds, if planted daily, grow into something that begins to change the field around you in ways that the conscious mind will struggle to track, but the body will register clearly. I want to address, also, what happens when the work seems to stall. Because it will, at some point, seem to stall. The stalling is not the work failing. The stalling is part of the work. The nervous system does not move in continuous lines. It moves in plateaus and small shifts. There are weeks where the floor seems to widen quickly, and weeks where nothing seems to be happening at all. The weeks where nothing seems to be happening are often the weeks where the most integration is occurring, just beneath the surface, in ways the conscious mind cannot register. Trust the plateaus. The plateaus are where the new floor is being stabilized. Without the plateaus, the widening would not hold. The new floor would collapse back, because the nervous system needs time at each level to consolidate before the next expansion is sustainable. When the work seems to stall, do not increase your effort. Increasing effort during a plateau is one of the most common mistakes in this work, and it sets the floor back, because effort is the energy of the old paradigm, and the old paradigm is exactly what the new floor is moving away from. When the work seems to stall, do less, not more. Return to the small practices. Notice what is present. Stay with the good for 3 breaths. Trust the plateau. The next widening will come on its own when the body is ready, and it will feel, when it arrives, like it could not have come any sooner than it did, because the previous level needed exactly the time it needed to consolidate. There is something to say, also, about the company you keep in this period, because the people around you will either support the widening or unconsciously work against it. This is not their fault. Their nervous systems are calibrated to the version of you they have known, and an unfamiliar version of you, even a better one, can register to their nervous system as a kind of loss. They may, without meaning to, attempt to return you to the version of you they recognize. This can take the form of subtle dismissals when you mention this work. It can take the form of jokes that puncture your new openness. It can take the form of bringing up stories from your past that reinforce the old floor. They are not doing this maliciously. They are co-regulating, as nervous systems always do, with the version of you they have stored in their own sense of how the world is. You do not have to leave these people. You do not have to confront them. You only have to be aware, gently, that their unconscious calibration is at work, and to not let it disrupt your own work. You can be in the same room with them and still hold the new floor, internally, without performance. Over time, as the new floor stabilizes, their nervous systems will update their model of you, and the small undermining behaviors will fade, because they will no longer match what they encounter. This is the most peaceful version of how the social field updates. It does not require confrontation. It only requires that you not collapse the new floor in order to make them comfortable. There may, however, be 1 or 2 people in your life whose own debt is so heavy and whose own commitment to keeping you at the old floor is so deep that the relationship will become more difficult as the work progresses. This is rare, but it happens. When it happens, you do not have to make any sudden decisions. You only have to notice, accurately, what is occurring. The noticing itself often produces the necessary movement in its own time, without dramatic action. Some relationships will simply become quieter. Some will redefine themselves. A few may end, slowly, without anger, because the field that held them together is no longer the field you are operating from. This is not a failure of the relationship. This is a clarification of what was actually holding it together. And clarification, in any domain, is the precondition for the truth becoming livable. Let me speak now about money itself in its practical form, because there is a tendency in spiritual work to abstract money to the point where the actual numbers no longer feel relevant. That abstraction can become a kind of avoidance. The numbers are real. The bank account is real. The bills are real. The work we are doing does not exist outside of the practical territory of dollars and cents. It exists, ultimately, to change that territory. So let us speak about it directly. The first practical change you will likely notice is not in income, but in expenditure. The floor, as it begins to widen, will reduce the frequency of unconscious small expenditures that have been functioning as discharge mechanisms. You will find yourself, sometimes, simply not buying things you used to buy, not from discipline, not from self-denial, from a quiet absence of the impulse that used to drive the purchase. The impulse was, often, the floor's way of discharging frequency debt before the debt accumulated to a level the system could not handle. As the floor widens and the debt clears, the discharge is no longer needed. The impulse fades. The small purchases stop, and the money that used to be spent on them remains in the account. This is the first practical evidence, often, that the work is happening. The bank account does not increase from a new income source. It increases from a decrease in the unconscious leakage that was previously invisible. Many people, in the early months of this work, are surprised to find that their bank balance is higher than they expected, without anything dramatic having occurred. This is the leakage stopping. This is the floor holding more, by no longer discharging it. The second practical change tends to come a few months later, and it involves the way you negotiate. People with low floors do not negotiate well, not because they lack the skill, but because the negotiation activates the floor, and the floor pulls them back toward the level it is calibrated to. They accept the first offer. They apologize for asking. They withdraw their request the moment they sense resistance. The skills of negotiation, applied to a low floor, do not produce results, because the floor reasserts itself faster than the skills can be deployed. As the floor widens, negotiation becomes easier, not because you become more aggressive, but because the activation that used to derail the conversation no longer activates with the same intensity. You can ask for more and stay in the asking, and the floor does not collapse you back. This is how the negotiated portions of your income begin to rise. Salary discussions go differently. Pricing for your work goes differently. Rates that you would have apologized for become rates you can state without apologizing. The third practical change involves what gets noticed in your field. As the floor widens, you begin to register opportunities that were previously invisible. A conversation that would have seemed irrelevant 6 months ago becomes the source of an unexpected income stream. A skill you had been undervaluing becomes the basis for something larger. A connection you had been dismissing reveals itself as significant. These are not new things appearing in your field. These are things that have been in your field all along, finally becoming visible because the filter has widened. People will say to you, "You got lucky." You will know, internally, that what they call luck is the visibility of what was always there. The fourth practical change, which tends to come last and which is the most visible to outside observers, is the increase in income from sources that did not previously exist. New opportunities that did not exist before, in any form, begin to appear. This is the field, responding to the new signal. The field has, in fact, been waiting for the signal to become coherent enough to send these offerings. As the signal coheres, the offerings arrive. They do not always arrive as immediately as the mind might wish. They arrive in the rhythm the field operates in, which is slower than the mind but more reliable. And when they arrive in forms that often surprise the conscious expectations. The income source might not be the one you imagined. The form might be different. The path might be unexpected. But the substance is real. And the substance, once it begins to flow, continues to flow because the channel has widened to accommodate it. These 4 practical changes are not promises. They are the patterns that emerge in the lives of people who do this work consistently. The patterns are not guaranteed in any specific timeline. They emerge in the timeline the nervous system requires. Some people see all 4 within a year. Some see them across several years. The variability is not a function of how much you want it. The variability is a function of how much debt was being carried, how deep the lineage encoding goes, how supportive or hostile the surrounding field is, and many other variables that no single audio can predict. But the patterns themselves are reliable. The work, applied consistently, produces the patterns. The only question is the pace. There is one more thing I want to name about the practical territory, because it can be a source of confusion. The work does not eliminate the need for ordinary action. You will still need to do your work. You will still need to send the proposals. You will still need to show up to the meetings. You will still need to take the risks that any moving life requires. What changes is not the necessity of action. What changes is the energy with which action is taken and the results that action produces. The same email sent from a wider floor produces different responses than the same email sent from a narrower one. The same proposal made from a wider floor is received differently than the same proposal made from a narrower one. The action is not different in form. The action is different in frequency. And the frequency is what the field is responding to. This means that the work we are doing is not an alternative to action. It is what gives action its actual effectiveness. Action without the work produces the kind of exhausting effort that has characterized so many of your previous attempts. Action with the work produces the kind of effortlessness that is often described in spiritual literature, but rarely produced by spiritual practices alone. The combination is the actual operative principle. The work clears the channel. The action moves through the cleared channel. And the result is what the surface culture calls success, but what we have been describing more accurately as the natural outcome of an inner economy that is no longer working against itself. I want to pause here and acknowledge something that may be present for you, listening. There can be a tension at this point in this kind of work between the spaciousness of what is being described and the urgency of what is happening in your actual financial life. You may have bills that are due. You may have obligations that cannot wait for the slow widening of the floor. You may have a situation that requires money in the next 30 days, not the next 30 months. That tension is real. I do not want to dismiss it. And I want to say, with care, that the work we are doing does not exist instead of dealing with the immediate situation. It exists alongside it. If you have urgent financial pressure, you must still address the urgent financial pressure through whatever practical means are available. Apply for the work. Have the difficult conversations. Make the calls. Take the steps. The work we have been doing here changes the long-term structure. It does not replace the short-term necessities. And the short-term necessities, addressed from a slightly wider floor, are easier to address than the same necessities addressed from a narrower one. The work supports the action. The action remains required. There is, however, one specific way in which the work affects even the most urgent situations, and it is worth naming. Urgency tends to narrow the floor further because the body interprets urgency as evidence that the level it is currently at is unsafe and must be defended. The defense, in turn, makes it harder to take the actions that would resolve the urgency. This is a vicious cycle that many people are caught in for years. The way out of the cycle is not to manufacture urgency in the opposite direction. The way out is to allow, for moments, even in the middle of urgency, a small recognition that the present moment is, in fact, livable. That you are, in this breath, alive. That the urgency is real, but it is not the whole of what is occurring. These moments of recognition do not solve the urgency. They simply prevent the urgency from narrowing the floor further. And the slightly less narrow floor is the floor from which the resolving action can be taken with more clarity. So even in the middle of pressure, the small practices apply. 10 seconds of noticing what is present. 3 breaths after something good, however small. These are not luxuries reserved for people whose lives are easy. These are the practices that are, in fact, most needed when life is hard. The hard life is when the floor is most under attack. The small practices are what hold the line internally, while the practical work of resolving the situation continues externally. The two run on parallel tracks. Both are required. Neither replaces the other. We have covered a lot of territory. The receiving layer, the resonance floor, the inheritance of nervous system patterns, the 3 doors, the scale at which this work operates, the practical changes that emerge, the role of action alongside the inner work. Each of these is, in its own way, a part of the single picture we have been building. The picture is not theoretical. The picture is operational. It describes what is actually happening inside you and what is becoming available in measurable form as the work continues. Let us begin to move toward the close, not because the conversation is finished, because the words, for tonight, have done what they can do, and what remains is what your body will do with them in the hours and days ahead. The close is not the end of the work. The close is the beginning of the rest of the work, which happens without my voice in your life, where it actually matters. Stay with the breath. Stay with the chest. Notice what has moved in the last hour, and let us prepare, gently, for what comes next. There is one more layer of this work that I want to open before the close, because without it, the picture is incomplete. We have spoken about the receiving layer. We have spoken about the resonance floor. We have spoken about the lineage. But we have not yet spoken directly about attention. And attention is the operative currency of the entire inner economy. Without naming what attention is, in this context, much of what we have built so far remains abstract. Attention is what your nervous system spends every moment of every day on the things it has decided are worth tracking. The amount you have is not unlimited. It is, in fact, quite finite. And the way it is allocated determines, more than almost any other variable, the shape of the life you are living. Most people, by the time they reach adulthood, have an attention allocation that was set by circumstances they did not choose and have never examined. They spend their attention, hour after hour, on the things their early experience taught them were worth tracking. And the things that are not on that list, however objectively important, remain invisible to them, because attention is what makes things visible. In the context of abundance, the attention allocation matters more than almost any other factor. People with low floors tend to spend a disproportionate amount of attention on what is missing, what is going wrong, what might fail, what is unfair, what has been lost. This is not because they are negative people. It is because the floor has trained their attention to scan for threats to its setting. A low floor is, by definition, a floor that has decided more is unsafe, and the attention it commands is, accordingly, calibrated to confirm that more is not arriving. The attention does the work of the floor, and the floor, in turn, is sustained by what the attention notices. This is one of the most elegant feedback loops in the inner economy. The floor sets the attention. The attention confirms the floor. The confirmation reinforces the floor. The reinforced floor narrows the attention further. And the loop tightens, year after year, until the person inside the loop can hardly remember that there was once a moment when the loop was not running. The loop becomes the default experience of being alive. And the loop is, from the inside, almost impossible to detect, because the attention has been so thoroughly captured by it that the loop is what attention has come to mean. The work we have been doing, in its essence, is the gentle interruption of this loop, not the violent disruption of it. The gentle interruption, because violence against the loop only reinforces it. Violence is what the loop expects. The loop knows how to defend against attack. What the loop does not know how to defend against is presence. Calm, patient, sustained presence. The kind of presence that simply observes the loop without trying to stop it. Under that kind of presence, the loop begins to relax, not because it has been defeated, but because it has been seen. And being seen is the only experience the loop has not been calibrated to defend against. This is why the small practices we named are powerful. They are not actions against the loop. They are moments of presence with what the loop has been filtering out. 10 seconds of noticing what is present. 3 breaths of staying with the good. These are not interventions. They are openings. The loop continues to run. But during the openings, the attention is freed, briefly, to register what the loop has been excluding. And each registration is data the inner economy uses to revise its model of what is safe and available. There is a particular form of attention that is worth naming separately, because it is the most useful one for this work. It is the attention that notices what arrives, in any form, however small, before evaluating it. Most attention, by the time we are adults, is evaluative. It looks at what arrives and immediately assesses whether it is good or bad, useful or wasteful, deserved or undeserved, sufficient or insufficient. The evaluation is so fast that we mistake it for the noticing itself. We do not realize that there is a moment before the evaluation when something simply arrives. And in that pre-evaluative moment, the receiving layer is fully open. The contraction has not yet begun. The arrival is, briefly, allowed to be what it is. The practice of staying in that pre-evaluative moment, even for a fraction of a second longer than usual, is one of the most direct ways to widen the receiving layer. When something is offered, when good news arrives, when a compliment is given, when an opportunity appears, there is a small window in which the body can simply receive before the mind begins its assessment. Extending that window by even a single second changes how much actually lands. And the cumulative effect of extended windows over weeks and months is a transformation in how much of what is offered is actually allowed to arrive. This is, in some sense, what is meant by the spiritual instruction to be present. Presence is not a mystical state. Presence is the practical capacity to remain in the moment of arrival without immediately leaving it through evaluation. It is a learnable skill. It is not the property of any particular tradition. It is built through small, repeated practice. And it is, in the context of this work, the single most useful skill you can develop. There is something to say, also, about the relationship between presence and gratitude, because gratitude is one of the most prescribed practices in the abundance literature, and most of what is taught about it is incomplete. Gratitude, as it is usually taught, is the practice of telling yourself you are grateful for things. The telling does not, by itself, change the floor. The body does not believe the telling. The body believes what the body experiences. Gratitude that lives only in language is gratitude that does not reach the layer where change happens. It can produce a slight mood shift, but it does not widen the receiving layer in a lasting way. The form of gratitude that does change the floor is something different. It is the embodied experience of being moved by what has arrived. Not the cognitive acknowledgement, the somatic response. The chest opening at the sight of something that has been received. The throat tightening at the recognition of a kindness that was unexpected. The eyes briefly filling at the awareness that something you did not earn has been offered to you anyway. This is gratitude as the body knows it. This is what the floor responds to. And this kind of gratitude cannot be manufactured by repetition of phrases. It can only be allowed by attention to what is actually moving in you when something arrives. The practice, then, is not to say you are grateful. The practice is to allow yourself to be moved by what has, in fact, arrived. The two practices look similar from the outside. They are entirely different from the inside. The first leaves the floor unchanged. The second widens it, slightly, each time it is allowed. There is a quality to the day that begins to change as this work continues, and it is worth describing because the change is so subtle that many people miss it until it has been present for weeks. The quality is something like a softening of the urgency that has been the background of ordinary life. The day stops feeling like a series of tasks to be completed before something bad happens. It starts feeling, instead, like a series of moments, each of which is, in some way, complete in itself. Tasks are still completed. Obligations are still met. Things still need to happen. But the underlying urgency, the sense that everything must be done quickly because something is running out, begins to soften. This softening is what the body returns to as the floor widens. Because the underlying urgency of the day was, all along, a function of the floor being calibrated to scarcity. The floor was saying, you do not have enough time. You do not have enough resources. You do not have enough room to breathe. And the body was experiencing the day through that filter. And the days were exhausting because they were being lived from a floor that did not allow rest. As the floor widens, rest becomes available again. Not because the schedule has changed, but because the relationship to the schedule has changed. The same tasks can be done from a place of presence rather than from a place of urgency. And the difference, over a week, over a month, is enormous. Notice, in the days ahead, whether the quality of your ordinary moments begins to change. Not the dramatic moments, the ordinary ones. The moment of brushing your teeth, the moment of walking from one room to another, the moment of waiting for water to boil. These are the moments that reveal the underlying floor, because they are not constructed by anything in particular. They are just what is happening between the things that get our attention. The floor expresses itself in the texture of these moments, and the floor widens, partly in the moments themselves becoming slightly more habitable. This is a strange thing to say in an audio about money, but it is also, perhaps, the most accurate thing to say. The work of widening the floor changes the texture of being alive. The bank account follows. The bank account is the visible surface of a deeper change, and the deeper change, when it is happening, can be felt in the ordinary moments long before the bank account catches up. I want to circle back, briefly, to the original frequency, because that phrase has been sitting in the air, and I want to say one more thing about it before we close. The original frequency is not a metaphor. It is also not a metaphysical entity that requires belief in any specific cosmology. It is, in the simplest possible language, the baseline state your nervous system was capable of before the conditioning of the floor began. The baseline state was characterized by certain qualities: a breath that reached deeper than the upper chest, a capacity to be at rest without anxiety, a relationship to the world that was, by default, more curious than guarded, a receiving layer that was open, a field of attention that was wider than the filter that came later. This baseline state is not something you have to construct. It is something that has been buried under the conditioning and that emerges on its own as the conditioning loosens. You do not have to learn it. You have to allow it. The body knows what to do when the interference is reduced. The original state returns. It does not return as an event. It returns as a gradient, subtle at first, then more obvious, then, eventually, simply the way things are. The most useful framing of this work, in the end, is not that you are trying to achieve something new. It is that you are returning to something old, older than your conditioning, older than your floor, older even than your lineage. The original state is what was there before any of it. And the work is, in essence, a long, slow homecoming, not to a new place, to the place you were before the world began telling you who you were allowed to be. There is a tenderness to this framing that the language of personal development often misses. Personal development tends to frame the work as construction. You are building a new self. You are creating a better version. You are manifesting an upgrade. The framing is exhausting because construction is exhausting, and construction is not, in fact, what is happening here. What is happening here is closer to restoration, to remembering, to allowing the original signal to be heard again, without the static. This is also why so many of the methods that have been taught to you in this field have produced the exhaustion you have felt. They were teaching you to construct. They were asking you to build something. And the building, however well-intentioned, was happening on top of a floor that needed restoration before it could support new construction. The construction was failing because the foundation was not yet stable. Restore the foundation, and the construction becomes unnecessary. What you wanted to build was already there, underneath, waiting to be uncovered. This is the most peaceful version of this work. And it is also, in my experience, the most effective. Because the body responds to restoration in ways it does not respond to construction. The body trusts what it remembers more than what it is being asked to imagine. And the original frequency is what the body remembers, beneath everything else, as the state it once was. You came here tonight wanting to know how to attract money. The honest answer, which is now possible to say with the full weight of what we have built, is that you do not attract money. You return to a state in which the money that has been moving toward you can finally land. The state is yours. It has always been yours. You have only forgotten it. And tonight, in this hour, you have begun to remember. There is a final image I want to offer before we close. Imagine a person who has lived for many years in a house with the curtains drawn. They have grown used to the dimness. They have arranged their life around what is visible by the small amount of light that leaks through. They have, perhaps, even forgotten that the curtains can be opened, or that there is a sun outside that has, all this time, been waiting to fill the rooms. One day, for reasons they may not be able to fully articulate, they walk to the window and they open the curtains. Not all the way, just a little. And the light pours in, and the room is, suddenly, visible in a way it has not been visible for years. The furniture is the same. The walls are the same. The dimensions of the room have not changed, but everything looks different because everything is being seen, for the first time in a long time, in the light that was always available, was always streaming through the window, was always offering itself, and was being filtered out by curtains that had been drawn so long the person had stopped noticing they were drawn. This is what the work feels like from the inside when it is happening. You are opening the curtains, slowly, gently, by small degrees, because the eyes have to adjust to the light, and adjusting too fast would be uncomfortable. But you are opening them, and the light, which has been waiting all along, is beginning to come in. The money is not the light. The money is what becomes visible by the light. The light is the original frequency. The light is the floor, widened. The light is the receiving layer, opened. The light is what has been there all along, waiting for the curtains to part. And the curtains, you now know, are not in the field. The curtains are in you, and you are the only one with the hands that can open them. You have already opened them, a little, tonight. The work from here is to keep opening them, gently, one small movement at a time, until the room is filled. Not all at once, not by force. By small, repeated movements that the body can integrate without alarm. Each movement is a widening. Each widening is a return. We have arrived at the close. The words are nearly done. What remains is what your body will carry forward into the moments of tomorrow, into the years of the rest of your life, where the actual work occurs. The audio is the trigger. The body is the territory. The territory is where it lives from here. Take a long breath. Let it land deeper than the upper chest. Let it reach the place behind the sternum where the contraction has lived for so long. Let the air in. Let the breath out. And notice that something in the room is different now than it was when this audio began. The room has not changed. The light in it has. Before the close, there is something about identity that needs to be named, because the question of identity is what determines, in the end, whether the work holds. Every person walking around has a sense of who they are. That sense is composed of stories, memories, roles, and most importantly, a felt sense of what kind of person they are. The felt sense is not the same as the stories. The felt sense is what your body knows about you, beneath the level of language. It is what shows up when someone asks you a question and you answer before thinking, with a kind of internal authority that you did not consciously construct. That authority is the felt sense of identity. And the felt sense of identity is woven intimately with the resonance floor. People with low floors tend to have identities that include, somewhere in them, the felt sense that they are not the kind of person to whom large amounts of money come. They may not believe this consciously. They may, in fact, consciously believe the opposite. But the felt sense, the somatic certainty, holds the lower setting. And when the conscious belief contradicts the somatic certainty wins. Every time. Because the body, in the end, votes more reliably than the mind. This is why so much affirmation work fails. The affirmation is the mind voting. The somatic certainty is the body voting. And the body, by sheer weight of biological priority, outvotes the mind. You can say, "I am wealthy," 1,000 times a day. And if the somatic certainty says you are not the kind of person who is wealthy, the somatic certainty will produce the life that confirms it, not from malice. From the simple operation of how identity works in the nervous system. The work we have been doing changes the somatic certainty, slowly, by giving the body experiences that revise it. Each small widening of the floor is the body voting differently. Each small acceptance of what is offered is a piece of evidence that revises the felt sense of who you are. Over time, the somatic identity itself begins to shift. And as it shifts, the conscious affirmations finally land, because the body now agrees with what the mind has been saying. And the life begins to organize around the new identity, because identity, in this context, is what organizes a life. There is a moment in this work when many people encounter the felt sense of being someone different. It is often subtle. It often occurs in an unremarkable setting. You will be doing something ordinary, and you will catch yourself thinking, "This is not how I used to think." Or you will respond to a situation in a way the old version of you would not have responded. And you will notice the response with a kind of mild surprise, as if you had been watching someone else. These moments are signals. They are the somatic identity beginning to update. They are the floor having moved enough that the person standing on the floor is no longer quite the same person. Welcome these moments. Do not analyze them too much. Just notice them. Each one is a sign that the work is operating beneath the conscious level. The unconscious does the heavy lifting of identity revision, and the conscious mind only catches glimpses of it in moments like these. The glimpses are encouraging. They are also, in some way, the most reliable evidence of progress, more reliable than any change in the bank account, because they indicate that the structure beneath the bank account is changing in a way that will eventually produce the visible changes. There is something to say, also, about pleasure in this work, because pleasure has been demonized in many of the traditions that have informed our cultural relationship to money. We have been taught, often subtly, that pleasure is the enemy of accumulation. That saving requires denial. That virtue requires the postponement of enjoyment. That those who allow themselves pleasure are, in some way, less serious about their lives. This teaching has done enormous damage to the inner economy because it has trained the receiving layer to associate pleasure with risk. The truth is closer to the opposite. The capacity to receive money is intimately related to the capacity to receive pleasure. They run through the same channel. The receiving layer does not distinguish between substances. It either opens or it contracts. And a receiving layer that has been trained to contract at pleasure will also contract at money because they are processed by the same mechanism. People who have permitted themselves more pleasure tend, over time, to have more capacity for money as well. Not because pleasure makes them richer in a magical sense, but because the receiving they have practiced in one domain transfers to receiving in others. This means that one of the most direct ways to widen the floor is to allow more pleasure. Not extravagant pleasure, not chaotic pleasure. Small, well-attended pleasures. The first sip of coffee, fully tasted. The first warm minutes of being under a blanket on a cold morning. The sound of someone you love laughing in another room. These small pleasures, when actually attended to, widen the receiving layer in measurable ways. They are not luxuries reserved for after you have enough money. They are the practices that contribute to producing the conditions in which more money can be held. I want to name the most common pitfalls of this work, because forewarning is a form of support. There are 3 pitfalls that catch many people in this kind of work, and being aware of them can prevent the most common derailments. The first pitfall is the temptation to treat this work as a new method to be added on top of all the other methods you have tried. You will be tempted, perhaps, to use what we have spoken about as a kind of strategy. To track your progress. To make charts. To set goals. To turn the widening of the floor into a project. The widening of the floor cannot be a project, because projects are the activity of the constructing mind, and the constructing mind is exactly what we have been moving beneath. The widening of the floor is what happens when you stop trying to make it happen and let the small practices do their slow work. If you find yourself, in the weeks ahead, turning this into a project, notice the impulse, smile at it, and return to the small. The small is where the work lives. The second pitfall is the temptation to measure progress prematurely. The mind wants evidence. It wants to know whether the work is working. It will, every few weeks, ask the bank account for an update, and the bank account will, often, not yet have the update to give. The mind will conclude that the work is not working. The conclusion will be wrong. The work is working, beneath the surface, in the somatic identity, in the receiving layer, in the resonance floor. The bank account is downstream. It is the last thing to change. Measuring progress by the bank account in the early months is like measuring the growth of a seed by digging it up to look at it. The looking interrupts the growing. Trust that the seed is growing, even when there is nothing visible to confirm it. The confirmation will come later, in its own time, when the plant breaks through the soil. The third pitfall is the temptation to abandon the work after a setback. There will be setbacks. There will be moments when the floor seems to have collapsed back to the old setting. There will be days when the practices feel meaningless. There will be weeks when the old patterns reassert themselves with such force that you wonder if any progress has actually been made. These moments are not evidence that the work has failed. They are part of the natural rhythm of how nervous systems change. 2 steps forward, 1 step back is the normal pattern. Sometimes it is 3 steps back. The next forward movement comes anyway, in time. The setbacks are not setbacks. They are integration. They are the body consolidating what was gained and processing the resistance to it before the next widening can occur. Do not abandon the work during these phases. The phase will pass. The next forward movement is on the other side of it. There is a question of time that needs to be addressed directly, because the conscious mind, especially in this era, is impatient. We have been taught to expect rapid results. The marketing of personal development has trained us to believe that significant change should be visible in weeks, if not days. The actual work of changing a nervous system takes longer than that. It does not take a lifetime, but it takes more than a weekend. The right way to think about the timeline is not in days or weeks, but in seasons. A season is roughly 3 months. The first season of this work tends to produce internal shifts that are felt but not yet visible externally. The second season often produces the first visible shifts. The third season tends to consolidate the gains. By the fourth season, a year in, the life is measurably different in ways that any observer, including the conscious mind that was so impatient at the start, can confirm. A year is the realistic timeline for a substantial shift. This is not because the work is slow in absolute terms. It is because the nervous system updates at the pace of nervous systems, which is not the pace of the conscious mind. The conscious mind can absorb a new idea in seconds. The nervous system absorbs a new floor in months. The discrepancy between these two paces is what produces most of the suffering in personal development. People expect the nervous system to move at the pace of the conscious mind, and when it does not, they conclude that something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. The nervous system is moving at its own pace, which is the correct pace for what it is doing. This is also why the work we are describing is, in some sense, generous to the listener. It does not promise a transformation in 30 days. It describes accurately what is actually possible in the timeline available. And the timeline available for sustained change is a year at minimum for the first major restructuring. After that first year, the work continues, but the foundation is in place, and the subsequent expansions tend to be faster because the system has learned how to expand without collapsing. Imagine, for a moment, the version of you who is a year from now. Not the fantasy version, the realistic version. The one who has done this work consistently, in small ways, for the 4 seasons that have passed. What is different about that person? Their bank account is, likely, somewhat different. Their relationship to money is, certainly, different. Their capacity to receive, in all domains, is different. The texture of their ordinary moments is different. The kinds of opportunities visible in their field are different. The quality of the breath in their chest is different. The grip of the hand holding the cup is different. The angle of the cup is different. That version of you exists. The path to that version is the path of the small practices, sustained through the seasons. Each day's practice is small. The cumulative effect of a year of small practices is large. And the largeness is not the bank account alone. The largeness is the entirety of how it feels to be alive in your own body, day by day, with a floor that is no longer working against itself. Notice, as you imagine that version of you, what your body does. There may be a small softening in the chest. There may be a small lift in the breath. There may be a small smile that arrives without permission. These are signals from the somatic identity that the version you are imagining is, in some way, already accessible. The body is preparing for it. The body is, in fact, already moving toward it. The audio you are listening to is one of the means by which that movement has begun. There is one more practical detail I want to mention, because it concerns how you live the days immediately after this audio. The temptation, after a session like this one, is to make changes, to start new routines, to set new intentions, to restructure your life in some visible way. I want to caution you against this. The most powerful integration of this work happens when you do not change much, externally, in the first few weeks. Let the work settle. Let the body process. Let the practices remain small. The temptation to make big external changes is, often, the floor's way of returning to a familiar pattern of effort, dressed up in new language. Resist the temptation. Live your ordinary life. Do the small practices. Trust the integration. The bigger changes will come later, in their own time, and they will arrive from a place of greater clarity if you have not exhausted the early energy on premature restructuring. The single most important thing you can do in the first month is, paradoxically, almost nothing. Notice. Allow. Stay. 3 breaths. 10 seconds. That is the protocol. Anything beyond that, in the first weeks, is excess. And the excess is what will deplete the energy that needs to be available for the integration. There is a quietness to this protocol that may feel insufficient to the part of you that is used to large efforts. That part will want to do more. That part will feel that doing less is irresponsible. Let that part speak, and thank it for its diligence, and continue with the small protocol anyway. The small protocol is enough. The small protocol is, in fact, more than enough. It is the precise amount of intervention the system can absorb without rebellion. More than that, and the rebellion begins, and the progress is reversed. This is the deepest paradox of this work. The less you try, in the right way, the more changes. Not because effort is bad, but because the kind of effort that has been failing you was not the kind of activity that produces results in this domain. A different kind of presence is required. A presence that is less like work and more like remembering. A presence that is less like climbing and more like settling. The settling is the practice. The settling is the work. And the settling Sustained is what produces the changes that no climbing has ever been able to produce. We are very close to the end now. Stay with the breath. Stay with the chest. Let the words settle. Let us spend a few minutes in a different register now. Less explanation, more direct contemplation, because the conceptual work has been done. What remains, before the close, is to give the body a chance to rest in what has been said, rather than to add more. Picture yourself, tomorrow morning, at the moment you first wake. The light is whatever it is, the room is whatever it is, the day is whatever it is. You have not yet opened the banking app. You have not yet looked at any messages. You are, for one moment, simply a body, in a room, at the beginning of a day. Stay there, in that image, for a moment. Notice the breath, in that imagined moment. Notice the weight of the body against whatever it is resting on. Notice that there is no urgency yet. There will be urgency, soon. The day will, in some way, ask for your attention. But for this moment, in this image, there is just being awake, just having a body, just being alive in a room. This is the floor speaking in its quietest voice, not the contracted floor, the original one, the one that was there before the conditioning began, the one that has been waiting all along beneath the layers. This is what the floor sounds like when it is not under siege. This is what the inner economy feels like when it is not being asked to defend itself. This is what the original frequency is. You have access to this, not as an achievement, as a remembering. Every morning, before the day begins, there is a moment when this is available.